Hi, I'm Edwin Rutsch, and this is our panel on how might we create more interfaith empathy. And I'm going to start off by introducing Sheima Salam Sumer, who's actually in Iraq right at this moment. Hi, Sheima. Thanks for joining this dialogue.
Thank you so much for having me.
So the way I got introduced to you is I came across an article that you wrote. It's called Empathy, a Trait That Can Transform Your Life. I might also mention that you possess a master's degree in counselor education. You've written two books. One is called How to Be a Happy Muslim. Maybe you could mention the title. I can't quite pronounce that word.
Inshallah.
Okay, Inshallah. And rise above your problems and choose inner peace. And you also wrote those articles on empathy. And let me just read what you start off the article by saying is empathy is a transformative character trait that positively enhances all areas of your life, including your personal well-being, family life, and work relationships. Not many people know the power of empathy in enhancing their personal well-being, as well as in changing the way they interact and feel about the world around them. So so that's just by the way a little bit of introduction. If you'd like to add some more and also introduce the other guests.
Well, thank you for having us. I'm a big fan of Dr. Carl Rogers, who as a counselor, and he taught that empathy is perhaps the most important trait of a counselor in order to actually help people and help them to grow and to improve their lives. So I happened to just, I learned about your website from watching a video about Dr. Rogers on YouTube, and your website was on that video or something, and so I went to it and I contacted you, and you had this great idea to bring us together and talk about interfaith empathy. And yeah, thank you for organizing this. And I would like everyone, if you don't mind, to just tell us your name and your educational background and some personal information.
Sure, I'll go.
Okay.
I'm happy to go. My name is Adam Ericksen. And I am out here in Eugene, Oregon, and I would just like to promote Sheima's book, How to Be a Happier Muslim, because I am reading it and finding myself a much happier Christian. So thank you for the book, and it's great. Highly recommend it for everyone. And Carl Rogers comes out in your book beautifully. So thank you for that. I was a pastor out in Chicago for 9 years, moved out to Eugene, and now I am a chaplain at a hospital. And I am finding myself learning more and more about empathy and compassion, and it's really exciting stuff, and looking forward to having this discussion about interfaith empathy. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. Yes, I'm Eric Merkt, so I'm here also in Afghanistan. I'm sorry, in Iraq. I was in Afghanistan before. I'm in Iraq. And here with Sheima, so we've known each other for quite a long time. My background is in Sufism in Islam, and I've been active in that now certainly over 25 years. Big interest of mine has always been comparative religious studies. I have a master's degree in religion and a degree in philosophy. And we've also been able to do a number of interfaith dialogues in South Carolina before. Sheima and I were participating in that together. And so the topic of empathy, or how to build empathy among the different religious groups, is quite interesting to me.
Oh, I guess I'm next.
Yeah.
Okay, hi. My name is Amal, and Amal Damaj, and I'm in Richmond, Virginia right now. I've been here for 23 years, like I told you before. I love it here. My background, I'm originally from Lebanon, but I've lived quite a number of places. I lived in Europe for a while, and then I came to the U.S., went to school, graduate school at the University of Arizona. Then I went to Canada for a year. Then I went back home for a couple of years. Then I got married and came to Richmond, Virginia, and I've been here ever since. And it's the longest place I've ever lived, so I call it home. And I met Sheima when she was 10. I was teaching Sunday school at the Islamic Center in Richmond, and that's when I met her, and she is really a unique person. I was never able to forget her, and although she moved in and out of Richmond many times, we always reconnect, and we're very good friends, and I think what she's doing is wonderful. Just so you know what my background is, I studied agriculture. However, I did not end up working in that field. Right now, I'm working as a medical interpreter and just enjoying life in general, volunteering here and there, and that's it. We lost the audio from Edwin.
Oh no, Edwin! Ah, maybe we should just keep going. I don't know, Sheima. Do you want to talk about how you got interested in empathy?
Sure. I worked as a counselor for a few years and as an in-home counselor, and while working as a counselor, I tried to use empathy, but the other people that I was working with, they kind of were more into the cognitive theory of counseling, which is more teaching and focusing on thoughts. And so I kind of left my original love of empathic counseling, and after leaving my work as an in-home counselor, I reflected on my experiences, and I realized that empathy is really what is the key to helping people, showing them that you really understand them and can walk in their shoes. So my heart is really connected with this idea of empathy and using it to improve our world.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go next. I probably first started getting into empathy about 8 or 9 years ago when I started working at a website called the Raven Foundation, and our big guru, I know Sheima, you're familiar with this, is a man named Rene Girard. And what Girard says is that humans have this really natural ability to kind of, he calls it mimic, but it's basically empathy. So we have this natural ability to connect with people on all kinds of different levels. And since he started this theory, we've discovered mirror neurons. And I know there have been episodes on mirror neurons before that Edwin has done. But basically, when I lift up a cup of coffee and start drinking, the mirror neurons just go nuts in your brain as if you are picking up the coffee too. It's why when someone yawns, other people start yawning, and when someone laughs, other people start laughing. It's this kind of emotional contagion. But what Rene Girard says is that this can work the opposite way too. And so if someone is like scowling, like you'll start to scowl too. If someone has anger or hatred, you'll mimic that anger and hatred. And so when it comes to empathy, it's about being very intentional about the way that emotions are contagious and how to, I guess, stop the cycle of anger through a different cycle, one of forgiveness, compassion, something like that. So that's kind of where my big interest lies with this.
Wow, thank you. That's very interesting.
I just wanted to add something about what Adam just said. I was listening to a podcast, a program on NPR called Invisibilia recently, and I can't remember exactly the technical terms, but they were exactly talking about this neurological thing with empathy, and they even showcased the story of a woman. I guess she wants to stay anonymous, so they didn't use her real name, or they just used her first name. And I forgot where she lives, but she was born with this ability to feel what other people are feeling. Like if they're eating something, she can feel it in her mouth, what they're eating. And if they're, you know, I mean, it's just amazing how, and because of that, her life basically totally changed, and she has decided, after like going out into the world and experiencing so many different things, she decided that, you know, she's gonna basically stay home and live in her own world, because it was just too much to deal with what was happening outside and feel everybody's emotions and everybody's sensations. And I forgot what the name of the syndrome is, but it's a medical syndrome, and her daughter also has it. It's like by heredity. So I thought it was very, very interesting. So there is a neurological basis for it, but of course I think our discussion will be more about probably the emotional, intellectual component of it.
That is fascinating. That's kind of hard to believe that you can taste someone else's food. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, she felt the good and the bad. She even like felt the pain. If somebody was having pain, she felt it. If it was just she had to learn to deal with it. And I don't know exactly how she did that, but she had to learn to deal with it. And you know, it was just very interesting. But I'm gonna go back and listen again to that podcast, because it's just something very, very interesting.
Okay, we're recording again. So I was just starting to share how, my relationship with religion, faith, and empathy. Just saying that we had a crash. So we're having to kind of edit this together, pick this up again. That I grew up in an evangelical Christian household, and when I was 18, I started traveling around the world as a seeker, kind of seeking the meaning of life and truth and what life was about. And I went to all countries all over the world, and what I found, I spent 10 years doing that, and I went to like Indonesia, which is a Muslim country, and I went to India, which is a Hindu country, and I was very, you know, firm in my belief that my belief was the right one, and you know, other people were wrong. But as I traveled and really kind of related to all these different people, I realized that it just depended on where I was born, what religion I would probably be, and it was important was the underlying values between people. So that's one thing I really saw. It was the connection between people that was really important, and there was people in countries everywhere that were very friendly and outgoing and warm and empathized with me, and I could empathize and connect with them. So so for me, that's kind of, I'd be maybe the atheist or the non-believer here in this group. That for me, it's really the underlying values that's important between people, and for me, that's about empathy. That empathy is what really gets us connected, no matter who we are. That empathy can be the connecting energy, or the space that we can really hear and see each other's who we are, what our needs are, what our values are, what our dreams are. So for me, empathy is almost like, I don't want to say religion, but it's what my faith is that it's really about connecting with people and hearing each other and seeing our common humanity. So that's a little bit about myself and how I look at it. So if anybody else wants to chime in.
Did your exposure to other faith traditions that you appreciated, did it actually lead you then to doubt your own? I mean, I heard you say something about being an atheist or something like that. Was that a figure of speech, or did something happen to you?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Is that I would say that my faith, it's kind of my faith in humanity got deeper, I would say, in terms of faith in religion per se, was less. That I really was seeing the common humanity that we have, that there's underlying feelings and needs and dreams and hopes that people have in general. And so that's what I look at, and that empathy is the gateway to that. But if there's people who have different faiths, I also see that empathy is the gateway for them to understand each other as well.
I mean, for me, empathy, the ultimate empathy comes from God, because God is so, he has so much empathy towards his creation that's why he is merciful and he is forgiving. If he didn't have empathy, he wouldn't be merciful and forgiving. And so, I mean, I feel like we are asked to display empathy as a to kind of mirror what our Creator displays towards us. So this is how I understand it in my faith, and why empathy is important in my faith. But if anybody else has different view of empathy, please share it.
No, I love that. I love that you brought that up, because in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the three faiths that I know the most, there is this command, this invitation to care for those who typically don't receive empathy in our world, for the strangers, for the poor, for the weak, for the orphans, the widow, marginalized, what my guru Rene Girard would call the scapegoats of human culture. And you see these scapegoats in every culture, and what I see our traditions doing are to move towards those people, the marginalized, in a way of empathy, in a way of putting ourselves in their shoes, but not just putting ourselves in their shoes, but trying to make life better. There's a sense in which we can, as a hospital chaplain, I can put myself in another person's shoes, and we can just spiral down together, and life is just horrible. But if you can kind of step out a little bit, you can develop together ways to move towards something that looks a little more flourishing, whatever that more flourishing happens to be. But it's an excellent point, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Holy Week. I mean, my Christian brothers and sisters, we are in the midst of Holy Week, where we claim that God comes in human shoes, human sandals, into our world and becomes one with us and experiences this kind of marginalization, and in return on Good Friday offers forgiveness in return. And this is kind of like what my tradition is kind of leading us towards. We fail to live into that radical forgiveness, but I think this is what all of us are kind of moving towards, is this radical empathy of being in another's shoes and trying to make the world a better place, as you say, from that. And it all stems from the God who is mercy and compassion, and receiving that from God and then sharing it with the world, especially those who are marginalized, I think is the mission of the Judeo-Christian Islamic movement.
Yeah. So you brought up an interesting point, Adam, which is sometimes, I mean, empathy can spiral down into something that's too much to handle. And there's a term amongst humanitarian workers, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's called compassion fatigue. People who go to help others in areas of war or natural disaster, when they see all the, horrible conditions around them, sometimes, I mean, they really have to resort to some methods in order to protect themselves from acquiring this compassion fatigue. And I am a person who's very prone to that. Like, I can sometimes, if I see others suffering, I feel too much their pain, and I just, like, it's too much for me to handle. So how do we keep our empathy within the positive realm and not let it get out of hand? How do we use our empathy to move forward and not hold us back and just stand there and feel sorry for the person that we're empathizing with? How do we do that?
I think that for people like us, I assume, who who try to have a great deal of empathy for people and dealing with this compassion fatigue, I think that our tradition has a very good answer for this, which is to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And quite often what happens is that we forget the love ourselves part, and we get stuck in just the love our neighbor part, and we go out there forgetting that, wow, we need to do some care for ourselves too. You know, there's this tradition where from Christianity where Jesus would hang out with all of these people, and then he would go away for days to kind of re-energize, to re-energize his batteries, I guess, so that he could go back into the world. And I think this self-care is something that you're hitting on, that is crucial for empathy.
Mm-hmm. Sheima, what's your viewpoint, since you have a degree in counseling, that's your background? Do you want to shed any more light on this? I mean, I agree with what Adam said, but do you have anything else to add?
I agree with what you said and with what Adam said. So in my article, I talk about self-empathy, and really your ability to empathize with others depends on your ability to empathize with yourself. And so you need to be aware of yourself and be aware when you are getting close to compassion fatigue. And when you are aware of yourself, you will realize also that if you take care of yourself and help yourself to have positive feelings, that actually benefits the world better in the long run. So you don't want to just keep feeling compassion and helping others and not taking care of yourself, because that's not a good idea for anybody.
Yeah, I would add to that that's the word that I use too for that self-care, is self-empathy. So it's a matter of holding my needs as well as the other person's needs equally. It's not about self-sacrifice, it's about holding our mutual needs together. And that the solution to the compassion fatigue, I would say, is actually more empathy. It's more empathy from others for myself. So when I start getting burned out, that's really, for me, a sign that I'm not being heard and empathized with, and I'll reach out to others to share that struggle or pain that I might be going through, and that's actually the it reinvigorates me, and it's about me being heard as well by others. So as a counselor, you know, it's like I might be listening to others, but I need to be heard by others as well. Mm-hmm. And so it's creating a whole space where it's of this mutual, ongoing, deepening empathy and connection.
May I interrupt just 1 second? My wife is here, and she had wanted to hear this, and so we had a little bit of a problem sharing an earphone here, being, you know, too clandestine in this, but, you know, no one said who's else in the room. In many ways, I think this is a topic much more in line with some of the things that she's been thinking about recently. And so if it's all right with you, I mean, is it okay if she participates in this?
Sure, it works for me.
Up to speed, so to speak, because she has been listening here. I'll just turn it this way, and
great.
You know, we can see maybe both of us.
Hello, Amal. Finally.
Hi, Santan. How are you?
Thank you. I'm fine.
Yeah, we can't hear you all that great, so if you can speak loudly, that would really help.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm listening right now. It's very interesting what all you have to say, and you do say. I like what Adam said, and Amal, and Sheima, and you, Edwin. Well, yes, I've been thinking a lot about these days. My contemplation is on evil, good, or I should say good first, good and evil. And this is all also related to empathy. But from my experience, I would say that empathy is coming from a higher level. Well, for one, for a person to feel empathy towards the other, in order to be able to feel the empathy for the other truly, sincerely, I think one must know oneself first. If you know yourself, then you can comprehend the others. And then I think saints are able to do this. Until we transcend ourselves from a human realm to divine realm, we cannot really show true empathy. We will be distracted, like Amal was talking about being in that condition in a war and seeing all what's going on and holding to empathy for the other party, for instance, who's doing the bad, who's the evil. So that would be hard for people like us, because we are at the level where our egos are high, we are selfish, we can't help this until we transcend ourselves to divine realm.
That's very interesting, Simton, that you bring up, like knowing oneself before attempting to know others. I mean, it's really interesting. I agree. I kind of agree with that.
Me too.
I have. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Adam.
No, I was. It's always the question of how do you know yourself? I mean, this is one of the greatest challenges that I think we face, because I exist, like the way that I know myself is mostly in relationships with others. I'm a dad because I have children. I'm a husband because I have a wife. And so I'm a chaplain because I work with others at a hospital. And so I exist kind of in this self, but also in this relationship with others. And so it's always a challenge to understand who I am, because when I'm with my wife, I'm a different person than when I'm with my children or when I'm at the hospital and things like this. So it's really hard to understand myself. And so I don't know if that brings up things for people or.
Yeah, it brings up something for me that I see it similar in that there's a notion that we get to, I mean, some people say, oh, you have to understand yourself, so it means like this introspection, kind of a individualistic kind of an introspection. But I find I get to know myself best by being heard by others, in the sense of, as a counselor, Sheima, that you're listening to someone, and as you're listening to them, that person is able to reveal who they are, and they're getting to know who they are by having someone there mirror and listen to them. And it's the same way that I find I get to know myself best when there's someone there that listens to me and reflects back or really hears who I am. And then my greatest exploration and insights about who I am is in that relationship with others. You know, leaving and maybe getting away out in nature and so forth can be good as well as another strategy. But I find one of the deepest ones is being heard by others. The second point would be about the nature of evil. There's a book out by Simon Baron-Cohen, who's an academic scientist out of the UK, and he wrote a book, The Science of Evil, and he's making the point of evil being an absence of empathy. And if you define the evil often as a circular argument, that, you know, why is a person evil? They're born evil, and it's kind of like scientifically accessible. You can't kind of start studying it because it's just like this circular argument. And that he's saying if we say evil is the lack of empathy, it's like a deficit of empathy, then we can start studying. It's like, did the Nazis not have empathy for the people that they were murdering, or why are all these different sectarian, all these different groups against each other? Why are they not having empathy for each other and doing such terrible things to each other? If we say it's really a matter of empathy, that there's this lack of empathy, then we can start going in and say, how do we create more empathy together? Okay. And one of the ways I would say is to have these dialogues.
Okay. May I interject here?
Please,
yeah. Okay, so you bring up a very interesting point. So you're talking about the scientist who basically defined evil as a lack of empathy, and I can agree with that to a certain point. Yes, I think lack of empathy is a huge component in evil. Like if a person were to do evil things, very evil things, or act in evil ways, definitely quite surely predict that this person is going to lack empathy towards others. However, I don't think that only lack of empathy will produce evil people. I think there are other mechanisms by which evil can be produced. For example, those Nazi war criminals that you're talking about, who did horrible, horrible things to their victims. If you take any one of them, I mean, I don't know, I haven't really studied their history in detail, but I'm sure that some of them were very, very loving husbands and fathers, right? So how could they have been loving husbands and fathers and at the same time tortured prisoners and murdered people in gas chambers and all those horrible things, okay? How did they cross that line from being, loving family men into being these horrible war criminals? How did they cross that line? It's because they looked at their victims in a different way than they looked at their spouses and children. And how did they look at their victims? They looked at their victims as being less than human. They dehumanized their victims. So this is what's happening now in the world. Whenever we see all this negativity we see on the news, it's not just the lack of empathy. It is basically seeing your opponent or your enemy as less than human. This, otherizing your opponent and basically dehumanizing them. This is the problem. When you dehumanize somebody, then you're of course you're not going to have empathy for them. So I think you can basically lead yourself to lack empathy by exhibiting that behavior of dehumanizing others. But when you remember that this other person, even if I don't agree with him or her, is still a human like me, they have the same basic human needs for love and compassion, and they feel hunger like I feel hunger, they feel thirst like I feel thirst, they feel sadness like I feel sadness. If I look at them in that way, then they're just human like me, and I cannot bring myself to totally lack empathy for them. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, am I making myself clear?
Mm-hmm. That's clear to me, and if I can piggyback off of that, what René Girard ends up saying is that the reason that we demonize other groups of people is because we have internal conflicts going on within our community, and those conflicts need an outlet. And so what's going on in Germany is being scapegoated for World War I, and their economic situation is just horrible. Mm-hmm. And they in order to avoid like an internal war in Germany, they end up finding a scapegoat so that all of their tensions can go on to someone else. And of course, that's not to excuse at all what Germany was doing. But you see this happening throughout human culture when we have these internal conflicts, and instead of exploding, they end up getting channeled onto a scapegoat.
Yeah,
now,
I agree with that.
What that ends up doing is not solving any of our problems because we're not dealing with them. We're just moving them onto someone else, and once we scapegoat them, there tends to be a moment of peace, but we've never dealt with our issues that are going on, and so they come back and we end up finding more and more scapegoats. And the answer to that, I think, comes from, you see that within the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, the scapegoat mechanism, but you also see the way out, which is through forgiveness, compassion, empathy for the other. I love the Quran when it says, you'll have to help me out with this, when it says, treat your enemy as a bosom buddy and you will become friends. I know I messed that up, but that's the essence of
it says
that
treat
verse
your enemy well, and then it'll be as if you've always been friends. So basically treating others with respect. I think respect is a very important component, that we should always respect the other, whether we agree with them or not, because they are humans just like we are humans. So we owe them that basic respect. And also, like, I believe that there was something very important that I wanted to say. Scapegoating and playing the blame game. Sheima knows that recently I happened upon the work of a doctor in social work, and her name is Brené Brown, and she talks about embracing vulnerability. And that was an eye-opener for me, because it brought me to see some verses in the Quran in a totally new light. And basically she did this research about who are these people who live wholeheartedly, who embrace life and live wholeheartedly, and they get to be successful. And she found through research that those are the people who are not afraid to embrace their vulnerabilities. They are not afraid to take chances. The only thing so for them, everything is negotiable. The only thing that's not negotiable is their self-worth and their being deserving of love. They know that no matter what they do, they will always be deserving of love by the ones they love. So that's the only part in their life that's non-negotiable. Everything else they're willing to take risks with. And I thought that, wow, for a person to embrace their own vulnerability and at the same time become so successful in life, that's a new concept for me, because we go around in our lives trying to protect ourselves from making mistakes. So those people are not afraid to make mistakes. We just try to minimize the mistakes because we think if we make mistakes, we're going to get hurt. And those people, on the other hand, they're not afraid of getting hurt. So this brought me to that story in the Quran, which I think we also have in the Bible, about the creation of Adam and Eve, although in the Quran it's told a little bit differently. And in the Quran, when God decided to create Adam, he told the angels that he was about to create Adam. And they asked him, why would you create this creature who's going to cause so much bloodshed on earth and, do bad things? And God said, I know what you do not know. So he had a reason, but he did not reveal it to the angels. And amongst the angels was Satan. Satan was not an angel in our Muslim version of the story. He was a high-ranking jinn, but he was stationed among the angels because he was so devoted to the worship of God. And so when Adam was created, Satan felt threatened. And he thought, oh, I was favored by God, but now there's this new creature that's this new kid on the block, and I'm going to get demoted maybe. So instead of embracing the new vulnerability and saying, no, I've got to prove myself even more now in the worship of God, he got arrogant in order to protect himself. So when God asked the angels to bow down to Adam, Satan said, no, I'm not bowing down to him because I am better than him. You created me from fire and you created him from clay. So with his arrogance, he tried to protect himself. He did not embrace that new vulnerability. And that's why he got banished from God's mercy. Whereas on the other hand, when Adam and Eve went into the garden and they were tricked by Satan into eating from the forbidden tree, when God came to ask them what happened, they said, we have wronged ourselves, and if you do not forgive us, we shall be of the losers. So basically, they did not blame Satan for their mistake. They did not blame each other. I know in the Bible it says that the man blamed the woman, but in the Quran it doesn't say that at all. So they did not blame each other. They did not blame Satan. They admitted their mistake and they asked for forgiveness. They embraced that vulnerability. They embraced that vulnerability that, hey, we made a mistake, we're vulnerable, but your love will redeem us. So I just felt like this is a great example of, you know, taking chances and embracing your vulnerability. And I don't know if that's like kind of ties into what you were saying, Adam. I hope so.
It does, and I love the way that the Quran tells that story. It's just fascinating, because it seems as though Satan has this kind of envy for humanity. Why did you need to create humans? And I think that envy is one of the blocks to empathy. You know, if we want to possess what someone else has, it's one of the ways in which we try to take something from them as opposed to sharing things with them. You know, and you see this throughout the biblical tradition of the Exodus, where God says, I'm going to take you out of this slavery, and all I want you to do is share with one another. Well, God gives this manna, and people start hoarding it for themselves, and they don't share it, and it all spoils. The food spoils, the relationships spoil, and when you start hoarding things, it just goes awful in these relationships. The other thing that comes up in my mind is that this guy Rene Girard talks about Satan in the Hebrew scriptures, and in Hebrew, Satan means accuser, the one who points the finger and starts this kind of scapegoat mechanism that's going. And he takes it from this kind of realm, this satanic realm up here, and the biblical account of creation of Adam and Eve kind of shows how we get caught up in this blaming of one another and shifting. He calls it the satanic mechanism, how we get caught up in that. And I love how the Quran is telling it differently, in saying, take responsibility for these shortcomings, for this vulnerability. We are vulnerable. Take responsibility for it. Show it to one another. And that's where I think a lot of healing can happen, in admitting that we get caught up in these mechanisms that aren't healthy, and also in kind of taking responsibility for them and finding the way through, the way out. So that's kind of what's alive in me as you're talking about that.
Well, maybe I'll just add about the vulnerability that Brene Brown talks a lot about, vulnerability, shame, and empathy. And in terms of vulnerability and empathy, for me, if I'm with people, and vulnerability means to me that I'm able to share what's going on in me. And if I'm in a very highly judgmental situation or environment, people are judging, whatever I say will be criticized, someone will point the finger. So that means, you know, I can, vulnerable would mean to say my truth even though I might get all these judgments thrown at me. But there's also vulnerability if I'm in an environment that's highly empathic. Well, I will be heard for whatever is true and alive in me. Then almost like it's almost not even being vulnerable. It's like I feel safe, that I can really share who I am and be heard. So for me, that's kind of like a relationship to vulnerability. Is we want to create an environment that whatever you say, it will be heard, it will be empathized with. We might not agree with what you're saying, but we want to hear what your truth is. So if we're talking about how do we create interfaith empathy, I think it's really about being willing to listen to each other, that we might not agree with each other, but we're going to start with saying whatever you have to say, whatever's alive for you, whatever is real for you, we're willing to hear it and to acknowledge it and to accept it, but maybe not agree with it. I will share my truth, and I will also hope that you will empathize and hear me. And through this dialogue, through this dialogue, ongoing dialogue through this empathic space, that we will get deeper and closer to each other.
I don't know. Is my mic working now? I can't tell.
Yeah, if you speak really loud and get as close as
Really
possible
loud.
to it.
I've got now she just unplugged it, so I don't know if you're getting the echo.
Yeah, we're hearing you well.
I don't know. I feel like I'm rewinding about 10 minutes because I guess my microphone wasn't really able to be heard. Just I took some notes though, so I hope I haven't forgotten anything. Edwin mentioned at the beginning values and seeing common values, and there's research to support that. A man named Swartz did international value research and determined that, in fact, all cultures do have the same values. We tend to think that they don't, and so we have all of these arguments. And you can think of like the controversy over the cartoons of the prophet, and one side saying you don't care about freedom, and the other side saying you don't care about mutual respect or something like that. Fact is that we all care about all of these things. That's been empirically proven. What differs is the hierarchy, the way that we rank these different values. And so to be able to talk with someone from another group, it's good to understand this first, because it saves you from implicitly dehumanizing them. Because, like, what planet are you from? You don't believe in freedom? Or that's just not accurate, and it always provokes a reaction that that you're never understood by that other group, and we can't really have a dialogue. So that's one point. The other point, I like what Adam said about his sense of contrastive identity. He said, in a way, he said, potentially I'm many different people. I have many different roles, but it has to do with who I'm dealing with at the time, which role gets enacted at that moment. So with his children, he's a father, and so on. It reminded me, we're talking about some of these same things in class. Today I showed a video clip of the Stanford prison experiments. And, you know, there's this social identity theory, self-categorization theory. It draws on also something Amal mentioned about how could these Nazis, what happened with Nazis? You know, they would, also Milgram, you know, addressed that. Other man, I forgot his name right now, addressed it also. This idea that, you know, he's a concert pianist at home and a loving father, and then he goes to the concentration camp and he kills, you know, the children and things. How can he have these two identities? And this theory, this social identity theory, self-categorization theory, says that, well, this is part of identity. We can explain this by identity. As an individual, you know, who could do the things like ISIS, for example, is doing right now? Who could take a knife and cut off the head of a stranger that he doesn't even know? I mean, to feel that much animosity and hatred towards someone that's, you know, effectively neutral to him, that's impossible. But what this theory says is that, in fact, whenever we sense our belonging to a group, and that who we are as a group, that group identity, is determined largely by the outgroup, just like what Adam said on an individual level. So by the outgroup, if I am, you know, a Muslim and I'm there in a meeting with atheists, well, you know, then the Christians and the Jews, we're all on the same side and we're believers. I'm not really speaking like a Muslim anymore. I'm sort of speaking like one form of a believer. On the other hand, if we're having an Islamic and Christian dialogue, then I'm a Muslim. And so the way I define myself depends on that out-group. And the theory says is that the reason that we join groups to start with is for reasons of cognitive clarity, so it makes sense of our world. We learn values, we share them with others in our group, others support the values that we have, and so forth. Reality makes sense for us within that group. Now, that's not to say that it's only subjective, but these dynamics take place, it seems, in all groups, whether they're right or wrong in their ideas. And on the other hand, there's a motivation for self-esteem when we belong to a group. So if you put these things together, then you find a bad, situation whenever people from two groups get together, because each of them is motivated to what they call maximum contrast in order to achieve the greatest clarity. So when we're under threat, we readily revert into kind of fundamentalisms, because that makes it black and white. I know where I stand, I know where you stand, I know what to do with you. And because of the self-esteem motivation, we're always on the edge of calling ourselves good and the other side evil. And so in research that has tried to reduce intergroup conflict, like Sharif's research, they've suggested things like superordinate goals, and that's one way that groups come together, where we have a goal that's assigned to the groups that are in conflict, and they cannot achieve this goal without working together. It's too much for either side alone to achieve, and so if either's going to be successful, they have to work out cooperative methods, and they're both successful. I think, in a way, if I may say, Islam, I think, has an easier time with this, perhaps, than Christianity does. I come from a Christian background, and I don't mean disrespect when I say that.
No, not at all.
What I mean to say is that this idea that every community had its prophet kind of puts us into sort of a global faith community, as long as we're at least dealing with believers following a recognizably traditional religion. And then, we can have that kind of superordinate group identity and maybe not need to feel under threat or that vulnerability in a negative sense. With Christianity, I think it can come, but maybe it has to come on the basis of a kind of universal compassion that Christ taught, loving your neighbor as you love yourself and not judging and that sort of thing. So it's kind of on an emotional basis, which is certainly a necessary thing, but I think cognitively in some ways it might be easier for Muslims to support that. I think you can see in the history of the Muslims that there has been, with some obviously notable exceptions, there's been a tendency to be willing to come to terms with other faith groups, and maybe this is a reason for that. But anyway, back to what I was saying, I think this whole group dynamic process that happens in every group, it seems, and it tends to depersonalize us, where we're no longer, an individual. This Stanford prison experiment, the video that I showed today, I hadn't seen this one before. I didn't know this thing. You probably are familiar with the experiment. You're right there from next door to where it happened, almost. What I didn't know before, is that Zimbardo was going along with this prison experiment, and he was thinking, hey, this is great because I'm learning so much. It's a wonderful experiment. While the people were descending into brutality, and really Abu Ghraib kind of behavior. I mean, exactly like what was going on at Abu Ghraib. But he's thinking this is great. Why? Because he's identifying with his group. His group is at that point these psychologists, and this is a great experiment that we're doing. What happened was he invited his girlfriend to come and listen and observe what was happening about on the 4th or 5th day. I didn't know this. And she had just graduated in psychology, and she was horrified at it. And she said, how can you do this, And he justified it on the basis of the benefits to science. And, that reminds you of Milgram's experiment there, right? You can't electrocute people for the sake of science. But then she said, I don't know if I want to be with you anymore, somebody who can do this, I don't know if I want to be your girlfriend anymore. And what I would say is that jolted him back to his individual identity instead of that group identity, and he was able to see he's a person, they're people, and look what's happening to them. And then that empathy was able to open up, and he stopped the experiment then. So, we have a problem just from the groups, but the groups give us so much benefit at the same time. We can't cancel them out. So how do we belong to a group but still have individuality and still feel that there's some greater group that we belong to. But I think we have to do this without, and this is why I was asking Edwin at the beginning, I think we have to do this without kind of secularizing it in a way, because that will be so unacceptable to so many people. That will stimulate that fundamentalist impulse even more strongly, because the threat of sort of blurring the lines and erasing things, is too frightening, and maybe justifiably so. So how can we deal with other people, feel that we're part of God's creation, and that we're all, in the same human boat, but put here by God, and that we really can have this dialogue as cousins, if not brothers. I don't know if any of that makes any contribution to the conversation. Then I'd like to continue somewhere.
Well, I have a couple of responses. I would love to be your brother.
Not just my cousin.
Huh? So let's all be brothers and sisters in this. I love that. Gosh, you just laid a whole bunch on the table that is wonderful and amazing, and tons of stuff is going through my head. I think that I probably want to agree with you that maybe Islam has a better way of kind of universalizing this. I think that, especially when I look at my own Christian history, I mean, we've had a really hard time. We've struggled in our history with violence, and I think you're onto something there. At the same time, I want to say that that love when Jesus says love your neighbor, he extends it to love your enemies. And Christian history has had a mixed. I don't want to say we've been really bad with this, because we've had really great moments of it, but it's certainly been mixed. And we went into not loving our enemies but killing them pretty quickly in our tradition. And when Jesus says love your neighbor and your enemy, he's not just talking about emotions. He's talking about actions. How do you do this? You go into the world and you notice how you get caught up in these mechanisms, and you forgive. St. Paul was out going to kill this early Christian movement because it threatened his identity as a Pharisee. His particular Judaism, it threatened him. He goes into the world and he tries to kill them, and then he has this experience with Jesus where he says, "Why are you persecuting me?" Here Jesus identifies, empathizes. He's in the shoes of the victims of human violence, and he says, "You got to stop doing this." And Saul has this radical transformation where he becomes Paul. He recognizes he gets caught up in the scapegoat mechanism, and he tries to do this total transformation. He has a mixed life with this, but he's always trying to come back to seeing Jesus, the holy, the one that we call God, in the victims. And he is stop doing this. You mentioned, one of the things you mentioned that really stuck with me was how we often define, I'll use my language, our identity group over and against another. And I think what empathy is bringing in is not defining ourselves over and against another, but with. Somehow doing the hard work of love and defining ourselves with the other. And I'll tell you this, I can empathize and define myself with each and every one of you on an inter-religious level. It's the intra-religious level that I have a really hard time with. Those who I'm labeling as Christian fundamentalists. They are the ones who I have a really hard, those are the ones that I really easily other. And I don't know if you have the same experience with that. The other thing quickly is the best person that I know who does this is Eboo Patel, the Muslim, who who goes to all these colleges here in the United States and has Jews, Christians, Muslims, other people, atheists, all working together for a common goal to better their community. And in these activities that they do together, discussions about religion and atheism and secularism come up, and they're able to talk about their differences on a level that's respectful, where they're with one another for a bigger goal. And I think that's one of the ways that we can, practical ways, that's a great model for building empathy between the religions and also possibly intra-religiously.
What was that
There
name
you
again, Adam? What was that name again?
Ibu Patel.
EBU?
EBOO.
There you go.
EBOO. Patel. Yeah.
He's got 2 books. One is specifically on his college ministry stuff. So, yeah.
I'll look online. Can you hear me still while I'm on the
Yes.
mic here?
Yeah.
I can hear you well.
Christianity has something, and Philip Sherrard, I don't know if he was an Englishman, became Orthodox, lived in Greece, translated Greek poetry and such. He wrote a great book, Christianity, and he was talking about kind of an ecumenism, but based on Orthodox doctrine. You know, there's always this problem that ecumenism tends to dilute the doctrine for the sake of some kind of community, maybe, or intergroup community. But he was trying to explore how that can be in Christianity without negating or diluting the doctrine. And we can look at St. Justin Martyr. Remember, St. Justin Martyr drew on Logos theology and said that all people in the past, wherever they were, who followed the Logos were Christians. James Cutzinger has an excellent essay on what's it called? Intellectual ecumenism. That's not the right word, but if anybody's interested, I can forward that. But it's about an intellectual basis in Christianity for an acceptance of other Orthodox religious forms. Just like what St. Justin the Martyr suggested, but that didn't catch on. You know, that wasn't really becoming a widespread opinion.
Yeah, you know, I like that. I just one last point on this. I don't think that Jesus came to start a new religion. I think that he came to redeem our religions away from violence and towards peace, forgiveness, love, and compassion. So that's kind of my last.
I just wanted to see if we could hear from Sheima. Do you have any response about empathy and identity? I think that's kind of was the general. If we could hear from the other 2 participants.
Well, I think that it's important to know yourself and to have a strong identity in order to feel empathy towards others. But then the paradox is that when you cling to your identity too much, it can be a barrier to compassion and empathy. So I'm struggling with that paradox.
I think the danger is the evil of exclusivism. Danger is evil of exclusivism. We need to understand the wisdom in multiplicity. God created us in different nations, different colors, different cultures, so therefore we have. And I think we should, instead of being exclusive, we should understand the concept of multiplicity and embrace it.
Yeah, and again, the idea of prophets in Islam. I mean, Islam has a historical advantage, I think, pretty clear, because it came last among the 3 religions that you mentioned. And so it was able to take into conscious account the ones that came before. I mean, Judaism really couldn't do that. It was the first one, right? And so you have to find principles that might apply to other religions, but you couldn't find them actually dealing with Christians or Muslims. Muslims did have to deal with the other 2. And so, you know, something was worked out kind of consciously and overtly about how to do that. Islam, of course, is a tremendous problem for Christianity, and I understand that quite well, because you know, the appearance is that just when everything was solved, boom, here comes this retrogressive kind of back to the law and back to denying you know, the redemption and things like that. So it's very hard for Islam, I think, to appear as anything other than, I mean, almost evil on a doctrinal level, despite how we might feel about Muslims. I mean, I quite sympathize with how kind of a certain predicament that Christians find themselves in doctrinally.
Well, one thing I wanted to add was about empathy and getting a little bit of an echo here. Empathy and identity, and that is that I look at how do I create a identity of being empathic. It seems that that's the core identity. We all have this identity that I'm an empathic person, and maybe I'll get off track sometime, but I'm going to come back to it. Then that becomes like a gateway to connecting with everybody. I can, you're talking, Adam, about the fundamentalists. My family are evangelical fundamentalists. It's like they're the people that you're saying you're having difficulty relating with. And what I found is that empathy is actually the gateway to connect with them. Like in my family, they were very skeptical about all the empathy talk and so forth that I was doing. But then there was a conflict happened in the family where two family members were, really mad at each other and kind of yelling at each other. And I was able to empathize with both parties and then bring them into an empathic dialogue with each other, which grew into a whole family empathy circle, which, we got through all these different levels of kind of conflicts and things that have been kind of swept under the rug. And it ended with hugs all around. And now it turned into a whole a series of family empathy circles where we have these deeply empathic dialogues with each other. So I see that as my identity as a person who is empathic. I might get off track, I might get, whatever, but I'm going to bring myself back and keep growing in that empathic way of being. And so the empathy does become my identity.
One of the things that I'm learning about empathy is, especially when it comes to the more fundamentalist Christian brothers and sisters, is that it's not about them. It's about a hook that I have inside of me. It's about my issues. And so in order to get past my issues, I have to deal with whatever is coming up inside of me about the fundamentalists, those who I label as fundamentalists. And this is one of the ways that I define myself over and against another group in order to find a sense of goodness about me over and against who I label as bad. That's one of, I think, the biggest stumbling blocks for me when it comes to finding empathy for people. Yeah.
I can kind of see the beef you have with fundamental Christians. Of course, I'm not Christian, I'm Muslim. I think the biggest problem with those type of Christians is that they view everybody else as needing to be saved. They want to save you. And honestly, that irritates me, because when someone comes knocking on my door, like those Bible thumpers, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, whatever you want to call them, when they come knocking on my door and they want to talk to me about their faith, I feel like although they're usually very, very polite people, and if you tell them to go away, they'll go away without a fuss. They won't persist. However, the fact that they're coming to me, I find it a little bit insulting to my intelligence. Like, who told you that I was lost and that I needed to be saved? Why are you coming to me with this? Can't you trust me to find my own way in life? That's what I want to say to them. Of course, I never say that to them. I just tell them, thank you very much, but I don't have time or whatever, and then they go away. The thing is, every religion in this world is entitled to feel that their way is the only way. However, what they're not entitled to is to impose that on others. So if you're a Christian and you believe that the only way to be saved is to believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, that's you're entitled to believe that. I'm not going to take that away from you. But you're not entitled to impose that on me. And I, as a Muslim, I believe that the way to be saved is to believe in the oneness of God and submit your will to Him. And that's my personal belief, but I'm not entitled to impose that on you. So this issue of proselytizing, this is what irritates me, because I feel it's like not respecting people's intellect, giving them the choice to choose their path in life. And in Islam, the closest thing we have to proselytizing is called dawah. Dawah actually is a word that means invitation. So basically, when we invite others to Islam, or what, you know, I don't want to say proselytize, but when we practice dawah, is we invite you to see what we have. If you like it, you can stay, but if you don't like it, you can leave. No one's going to hold you against your will. And it's a much more subtle way of preaching the religion, basically. You know, and you can refuse the invitation altogether. Just like when somebody invites you over for dinner, you can say, I'm sorry, I'm busy, I can't come, you know, I have a conflict on that particular day. So you won't go to their house, or you might go to their house and find yourself comfortable and want to come again and again. Or you might say, okay, it was just a one-night thing, I'm not coming back here because I didn't feel comfortable. So this is the thing. It's inviting others to see what you have and letting them decide for yourselves. But you have to invite them to come. You don't go like basically to their own, you don't encroach on their comfort zone. That's what I don't agree with.
Would you say that they are not empathizing with you? That there's a lack of empathy for you in their approach? They're not.
They're empathizing in a wrong way, because they think, oh, you know, poor Muslim woman, she's lost and we've got to save her. So they're basically empathizing with me in the wrong way. I don't need that kind of empathy. What I need is respect for my intellect. I'm an intelligent woman. I gave this much thought before I became a practicing Muslim. Why would you assume that I'm a lost person? You know, or that I need to be liberated or whatever.
Would it perhaps be sympathy, that they're feeling sorry for you, versus empathy, like they're saying, oh, poor you, so it's like kind of a sorry and a looking down upon you?
Of course, they don't say that, they just think it.
Okay.
Or we assume that they think it.
It's just, I'm trying to make the distinction between sympathy, that it's not that they're not perhaps empathizing with you, they're sympathizing with you, and sympathy is really actually blocks empathy. So I just wanted to make that distinction, that what they're doing is maybe sympathizing with you, which is feeling sorry for you, which is very demeaning, I'm imagining, and that what you would really like to have is them hear what it is that's important to you and really listen to you.
Mm-hmm. I guess. I mean, it's just about. Oh, there's echo again.
Yeah, I'm muting his mic from remotely here so we don't get the echo.
Okay, so it is about like assuming that people make choices in life for a reason. You know, I mean, I'm sure there are people in this world who were born into a certain faith tradition and they never questioned it and they just carried on with the tradition. But there are other people who actively looked for a faith tradition to follow. I was one of those people. I was born into a Muslim family, but a non-practicing family, and my parents never taught me almost nothing about Islam. When I was 15, I started to think about God, and I started looking, and I started reading books, and I read books about many different faith traditions. It did not occur to me to read about Islam in the beginning. Then after I read about so many other traditions, I said, well, let me look at Islam, and I started reading the Quran, and it just clicked for me. This is what I wanted to believe in. And so I came to my faith in a very active way. I sought it out, I researched it, I studied it. So I'm not someone who's following blindly. So for someone to assume that I'm lost and that I need saving, it's very, very demeaning to me, and it just puts me off. So,
can I
do you have any reactions?
Yes. I love what you just said. One of the things that I also love about the Quran is that it has this emphasis on putting on God consciousness. I forget what surah it is, but it says to put on the consciousness of God, the garments of God. And what this means for me as an outsider is to go to the Bismillah. That's how you say it, right? God of mercy, compassion. This is the God consciousness. And putting on the God consciousness is empathy. Empathy for God, God coming into our world, this God consciousness, and treating others with this mercy and compassion. And I think the great challenge for me, as Edwin has shown with his family in this beautiful way, is to treat those who are other, who we label as other, with this God consciousness of mercy and compassion. And these people who come to my door also drive me nuts. But there's on some level, what they're doing is good. Salvation is a good thing. However they determine it, I don't know. But I want to be saved from something and into something else. And that somebody wants me to be saved as well is a good thing. We may disagree on what exactly that means, and we probably will. But there's an underlying good in what the other is looking for, I think, I hope. And that's one way to empathize with them, I think.
Yeah, I like that, Adam. And I was just going to say I enjoy talking about religion. I enjoy hearing that someone is a committed Christian. I enjoy hearing that someone is a committed Jew or a Buddhist or a Hindu, following the religion, according to its traditional precepts. I see such a loss of faith in the world that we have now, and such a shallowness in it, that whenever anyone is following any of these, I'm thrilled. I want to give them a hug. I'm very happy about that entirely. I think to address Amal, the thing that Christians do not understand, I mean American Christians especially, they do not understand Islam, and the news, of course, is not going to help them with that at all, because that's sort of the outer combative face of Islam, and that's not really the Islam that people live in their families and that sort of thing. And what happens, I think, is because Christianity didn't historically, I mean at the time of the Revelation, have to deal with Islam, they saw that the Muslims have a law, a Sharia, and so they kind of assimilated us to sort of the Jewish position that St. Paul talked about, a law without grace. And so in interfaith dialogue, I've usually been a little bit surprised to find that they are surprised that a Muslim knows anything about love or mercy at all. And they think, wow, you must be a special kind of Muslim, to know about love and mercy, because they thought when they walked in there and said how much they loved us, we would all start crying and think that we've never seen this thing before. And, that's not true. So one of the ways to build empathy there is just through speaking with people, because they'll realize that we're not this kind of legalistic. And Adam, you mentioned, too, the start, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. So, I mean, Muslims view the law in the context of grace, that the giving of the law is itself a grace, that guidance is a mercy from God, it's not something that's seen in the opposition that St. Paul treats it. Now, the viewpoint that he has is accurate. I mean, that's certainly one way to look at it. In some cases, that's exactly how it should be looked at, but Islam kind of puts the law into the context of grace, which I think is something different. And in that way, we can have beneficial dialogue maybe for both, because it's possible then for Christians And I know the Calvinists, for example, see this, that after you experience grace, there's still a moral life to be lived. This is, you have to follow the moral law in some sense. You're not saved by it. But the fact is, the Muslims don't say you're saved by the law either. Muslims say you're saved by God's mercy. The Prophet himself said, I'm saved by God's mercy. You know, he said, everybody's saved by mercy. And they said, who, even you? And he said, yeah, even I'm saved by God's mercy. Nobody can get in without God's mercy. It's not through the law. So we have this kind of sense, but until we talk, we don't know. So I really wish there was, you know, a way to have dialogue on a much broader basis than what happens now, because I think if, you know, any group of Christians and any group of Muslims almost got together, they would learn so much about each other that a lot of this lack of empathy would be broken down, because we would see how similar the concerns really are. I mean, if you talk about family, my wife, and she can tell you here, she has a friend, her best friend, well, not her best friend, one of her best friends here is a Christian lady from Africa. They agree on everything, except that the African lady prays that my wife will see the truth of Jesus, you know, and assumes that my wife is praying for her to convert to Islam. Other than that, the worry about the internet, about children and electronics, you know, about modern life and technology alienating us and needing to simplify and go back to proper values and tradition. All of that's completely agreed on. And as soon as we start talking with sincere believers, this comes out. But it will never come out on the news where what's really important is conflict, not solution to the conflict.
Well, I think we have about 5 minutes left for this panel. So what I was hearing is actually some solutions there, where you're saying here's some solutions as we bring people together to start having these interfaith dialogues, and that's a way forward. So perhaps we could go have a summation from each person about what do you see, kind of your bullet points of next steps for creating more interfaith empathy in summation. Perhaps Sheima, would you like to go? Or whoever.
I think people have said that we need to talk together more, and my husband gave some good ideas. He said that have people from different religions actually practice the rituals of different religions, like have a Muslims go to a church and sit during a service, and have Christians pray like a Muslim does, just to kind of get the feel of it. But those are some of my ideas.
If I may say something, yeah, I think that the most essential thing to have is respect. You know, respect each other, respect the other, and you know, that they're on the same human level as you, and they're no less human than you are, even though they may have a different culture, different you know, tradition, different religion, different whatever. They're still fully human, just like you are, and you may not see eye to eye with them on a lot of different issues, but they have the same worries as you, they have the same weaknesses as you, they have loved ones that they worry about, they have struggles in life. So if we can just basically see those other people as being fully human, and then start the dialogue, because the dialogue, of course, is very, very important, then I think that would lead to more empathy and more peace in this world.
Wow, yeah. Being everybody on the same human level and the fullness of humanity, I love it. And going to different traditions and participating in these rituals that others have, those are just great ideas, and I can't say it any better. One of the things that's going on in my head, Edwin, is that you, I think, posted an article from NPR about empathy, and from Jeff Mogul at McGill University, where he said that we we lack empathy for strangers. And I think, and the way that the practical thing that they did to bring up empathy was to have, among strangers, was to have them play video games. I wish that they had them go to a mosque or a church or a synagogue or something, but it was like video games. And the point was that they had this common thing that they could cooperate and work together. It wasn't a violent video game, it was actually Rock Band, where they could work together on something. And I think that bringing our traditions together and exploring, working towards something bigger than even our traditions, even our religions, while at the same time going through these rituals with one another, but trying to come together, make our community a better place, is such a powerful thing. Also, to get over understanding that stranger danger is one of our hooks, our common hooks in humanity, and getting past that. And I think that our traditions lead us to that in going out to the stranger and providing hospitality towards them. So.
Abdulmonaim and your wife?
Okay, I think at the human level, we need to actualize evil is. I don't know if I was heard because you just pulled up.
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah.
You're on.
Actualize, first of all, what evil is. I think it's, what it is in spiritual level. Satan, yeah, we need to come to realization of what evil is. We need to be able to define it in our experience in this life, and so that we can combat against it. Satan is loose free. He's here today walking around us, but what he wants us is to forget him, not to recognize him. And then what happens when we forget evil, when we don't recognize him, then we start fighting against each other. But once we realize, hold on, there is good and there's evil, and I want to take the side of good, how am I going to do this? The first step for me is to get to know myself, as I said in the beginning. Then I can sympathize, and then finally I can empathize. And so to me, the most important thing is mutual inclusivism at the human level. No matter what person is, who they are, and as Jalaluddin Rumi said, come whoever you are, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, or idol worshipper. I think we have to embrace humanity as it is and leave the decision to God at the end.
And like Adam said, Satan is the accuser of the brethren. And if we're not going, every time we accuse someone else, it's like almost, a satanic liturgy that we're doing. We're like participating in the worship of Shaitan. We're glorifying Shaitan and his way of doing things when we start accusing each other. And so if we can break that, Gurdjieff, Uspensky, the work, the fourth way, if anybody's looked at that, they say the world runs on negative emotions. It's not on other things. And if we can wake up from this, and correct that thing inside our own soul. We all have this problem. Whichever religion we follow, and come with that kind of positive attitude, openness, and learn. Then it sounds cliche, but I don't really think it's hard to do. I can sit down with any believer in any faith and feel a closeness, like Adam said, feel like we're brothers. That's not hard to do. If you're open to that, and if you're willing to accept the vulnerability that Amal talked about, and you regard that person as a human, most of the things that a believer believes make sense. They may look at it from a slightly different angle than you do, but it makes sense. It's all respectable. Once we hear each other, I think it's impossible to think of the other group as inhuman or idiotic or brainwashed or anything like that. Once we know each other, so the talking with that kind of right attitude. Maybe we already knew this, but.
And when we start talking to each other in the religious dialogue, we'll find out we have more things in common than uncommon.
Okay, well, then I'll actually want to build on what Adam said, that if we have a shared project, in a sense, it's kind of what I was hearing, if we have a shared project. And for me, that shared project is empathy, and that's what this panel was about, that we have this shared project, which is how do we create more empathy together, and it's something that we can work together with. And one of the main ways of doing that is to have these dialogues. So I think that this is what this panel was about. And I would love to keep this dialogue going. There's other processes we can do. There's a way of doing empathy circles, which is like an empathic listening process. We can actually use these processes to have a more empathic structure, that is used in counseling, for example, and is based on the work of Carl Rogers. So these are, I think there's next steps that we can do, and I would, offer that we can continue this dialogue, and I've very much enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot and really enjoyed the connection with everyone and hearing everyone's insights.
I'm with you, Edwin. Whatever you plan, I'm with you. That's great.
Thank you for bringing us together.
Yeah, thanks. We enjoyed it. I mean, all we were missing was the cup of coffee, and we would have had a nice little sit down.
Great, and yeah, with the internet now, we can reach across countries. We're connecting from the United States to Iraq, and so this is really quite amazing. I'm quite excited about this. That we can have these dialogues internationally through this technology. So I want to thank everyone for taking part, and very grateful for that.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And we said so many fantastic things in this dialogue, and I was hoping that I could actually type it up and analyze it for some nuggets of wisdom. So how can we view this dialogue?
It'll be on YouTube, and you'll be able to download it and take just the audio from it, so you can transcribe it if you'd like. I'll have to download it and then edit the pieces together, so that's going to take a little longer than usual. Usually within an hour it's available and online, but it will actually be online within about an hour, but to edit the pieces together is going to take me a week or so and re-upload it. So with that, I'm going to stop the broadcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.